Hello and welcome to my Learn With Me Minifreak series. This is episode 9, LFO Shaper. So firstly, what is a Learn With Me series? Learn With Me is a series where you follow my end-to-end process learning to get the best out of a synthesizer. In this case, it is the Arturia Minifreak. We've looked through a large portion of the features of the synth. We looked at the LFO section previously, but I omitted a pretty important feature which we'll look at now. So first, let's create an init patch. Let's make something vaguely interesting. So let's do something with the LFO. In this case, I think what I'm going to do to illustrate it is I'm going to turn up the resonance on the filter and we're going to animate the cutoff with the LFO. So this should give us a clear sound. So LFO1 is what I'm working with. So I'm going to use LFO1 to modulate the filter cutoff. So, as we saw before, there's an LFO rate parameter, there's the wave parameter for different wave shapes, the final of which is called shaper. And this is what we're going to talk about today. Shaper is a way that you can write or draw your own custom LFO wave shape. There are a number provided, so let's look at those first. Hold down Shift and turn wave. You may notice that that seems to go a lot slower than the previous LFO was going. Why is that? It is because the LFO shaper rate is set to 1 step. So what that means is there are up to 16 steps in the waveform that you can create. And it means that for each full cycle of one of the regular LFO waves, it will play one of the steps. So if something has very many steps, then it will seem to go very slowly. We also have the possibility of setting this to all steps. So you should hear it seems to go a bit faster. I'm going to set that back to... there you go. I didn't actually change it. So now you can hear it goes quite a bit faster. For our purposes, maybe this is a bit too fast. So let me go and change it back to 1 step to turn the rates up. Okay, sounds good. That was a bit strange. It seemed like I got a stuck note for a second there. Okay, so let's try some of these other shapes. Unipolar cosine. Short pulse. And I think this is hinting at some of the possibilities here. You can hear that this is rhythmic. Now, given that we can tell it to play 1 step, depending on the rate parameter, we can also tempo sync the rate. So this would allow us to have a rhythmic element which was synchronized with the tempo. I think that's quite compelling, pretty interesting. Let's move on. A whole load of these things. Sounds a bit like a sample and hold, but it's not a sample and hold. There are a number of slots. There are 8 slots for user-defined waves. Another thing you may note, it's interesting that this is repeating, but there are other triggering modes here. So LFO retrigger, we have free running, we have poly keyboard and mono keyboard as I described, legato keyboards, meaning that it won't reset with every new note if you're playing legato, but one means that the LFO will only follow its shape one time. So that means that these LFOs can function similarly to envelopes. Given that we also have this cycling envelope, well, this cycling envelope could act like an LFO. So we could have 3 LFOs if we wanted, or we could have these 2 functioning as envelopes, giving us 4 envelopes. I think this is a really nice capability to have available. We can have LFO1 re-trigger on LFO2. So that means that you'll get something like a sync behavior. You can have LFO1 re-trigger on the cycling envelope. We can have the LFO re-trigger at the start of the sequence. So there are a number of ways that we can make these interesting rhythmic LFO sounds, and we can make them interact and stay in sync with other elements here. I think that's a pretty interesting opportunities open to us. And given that you saw that one of the options here was user shape, let's move to the user shapes. And now let's go into edit mode. And I think this is where there's a lot of fun to be had. Edit mode can be a little bit confusing to start with. First thing to note, there are up to 16 steps. But if you use fewer than all the steps, then the cycle will be shorter. Additionally, in each step, it can be running in 1 of 4 different modes. So for each of the individual steps, it can be ramping from 0 to some level you set. It can be ramping down from some level you set to 0. It can be ramping up from 0 and back down to 0 to a level that you set, or it can be continuing from the previous value that was set. All of these also have a curve parameter. So let's just try and use this for now. So while we hold this down, we can use, it's a bit like a touchpad on a mouse. We have the possibility of drawing in. Because the last step is 1, I can only draw that step. So let's make the last step, step 16. So now you can see that I'm drawing in a shape for each step here. So I've just defined. And you can hear that wow, 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 wow. You can hear the shape that I just drew. You can see how quick that was to do. The editing is not the most intuitive thing that I've experienced, but let me go and click. So I press and hold one of these steps. Hopefully you can see that I can adjust the curve. So the curve can be going between the values, remaining at the original value and then dropping, or dropping and then moving. So for each one of these steps, if I wanted, I could press and hold, and I could manipulate the shape. So now that smooth sweep has that steppy sound going on there. Let's try and change some of the other ones. Let's try some of the other modes here as well. So we have this ramp mode. So I can modify the first step to be a ramp step. So you can see that it goes from 0 to a value that I set. So I hold the next step and change it to also be a ramp. So you see this is going from 0 to a value I set. We can try the down ramp, which means it's going to go from the value I set to 0. And let's try the other shape, this one. So you see the curvature can have solid top to it all the way down to a narrow spike. So let's listen for that. Hear that little tick. Do-do-do. So I haven't made a particularly interesting shape here, but I hope that I've illustrated to you that the LFO section, even though it only takes up a little bit of the panel, really has a lot of capabilities. And I think this LFO section, combined with those oscillator algorithms, are elements that make this quite a unique synthesizer to use. I feel like you can get timbres that ordinarily you would only expect in software synthesizers, but this is a piece of hardware that sits on your desk, in addition to the included Minifreak V license, meaning that this can be a soft synth and you can run multiple instances in your DAW project. I think that's all I want to say. So all that remains to be said from me is thank you very much for joining me today, and goodbye.